reality, existence, everything we see, hear, and experience. It all raises a fundamental question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And no, this isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle to entertain armchair thinkers. This is the question, the foundation of everything. If we can't answer this, then we can't claim to understand reality at all. And no, science alone doesn't solve it. Even physicists like Stephen Hawking, Sean Carroll, and Lawrence Krauss admit that science describes how things change and interact, but it doesn't explain why there is a universe in the first place. At the heart of this question lies a stark choice. 1. Everything is contingent, meaning everything that exists could have failed to exist, and nothing exists necessarily. To something is necessary, meaning at least one thing exists that could not have failed to exist. So which of these is true? Which of these must be true? Look around you, your phone, your house, your own body, the entire universe itself. Everything you see is contingent. Everything could have failed to exist. Everything that exists is dependent on something else for its existence. Nothing in the physical world explains its own existence. Now, let's follow that dependency chain : Why does your phone exist? Because it was manufactured in a factory. Why does the factory exist? Because people built it. Why do people exist? Because of biological reproduction. Why does life exist? Because of planetary conditions. Why does the universe exist? At some point, we need an answer that doesn't just push the question back indefinitely. If every single thing in existence depends on something else, and if this goes on forever, then nothing would ever actually exist in the first place. Think about it. If you had an infinite row of dominoes stretching backward in time, but there was no first domino to start the sequence, then none of them would ever fall. If existence is just an infinite sequence of borrowed existence, then reality itself would never get started. So if contingent things can't explain their own existence, then something that isn't contingent must exist. This is what we call a necessary being, something that doesn't depend on anything else, something that couldn't fail to exist. And this isn't just playing with words. This is a logical requirement if we want to make sense of reality at all. This is why St. Thomas Aquinas, in his Third Way, argued that : If everything were contingent, then at some point, nothing would exist. If there were ever a point where nothing existed, nothing would exist now. But things do exist, therefore, something must be necessary. Objection 1. What if the universe itself is necessary? Some argue that maybe the universe itself is the necessary thing, but there's a problem: the universe changes. It had a beginning Big Bang. It's made of parts. Aquinas, Leibniz, and even modern philosophers like Alexander Prussian argue that something that changes, began, and is composed of parts cannot be necessary, because it still needs an explanation for why it exists the way it does. Objection 2. What if reality just is? Some say, maybe there's no explanation. Maybe reality just exists without reason. Single quotes. This is a direct rejection of the principle of sufficient reason, Feser, which states that everything must have an explanation even if we don't know it yet. Denying this principle means giving up on rational inquiry altogether. If things can exist without explanation, then science, logic, and reason all collapse. Objection 3. Quantum mechanics shows randomness at the fundamental level. People bring up quantum mechanics as if it disproves necessity. But quantum events happen within reality. They don't explain why reality itself exists. Even physicists like Werner Heisenberg and Paul Dirac recognized that quantum mechanics doesn't eliminate the need for a fundamental cause. Now, some might say, okay, maybe there's a necessary being. But why call it God? Good question. Let's break it down. For something to be truly necessary, it must have certain qualities. Pure actuality. No potential to change, because if it could change, it wouldn't be necessary. Simple. Not made of parts, because if it were, it would depend on those parts. Eternal. Outside time, because time itself is contingent. Infinite, in perfection, because a necessary being has no limits or deficiencies. The only thing that fits this description is what we call God, not a God, not an impersonal force, but the necessary foundation of all reality. Here's the bottom line, : 1. Contingent things need an explanation. 2. An infinite regress doesn't work. 3. Therefore, a necessary being must exist. 4. And that necessary being has all the attributes of God. This isn't about belief versus unbelief, it's about following the logic. Wherever it leads. Pause. Screen fades to black. Closing parenthesis. The question isn't whether a necessary being exists. That's already settled. The real question is, are you willing to think about what that means?